Hey everyone, Thyworm here with my solo self-found starter atlas trees by popular request. In this video I will talk you through my choices for the atlas passive tree in the upcoming league start of Settlers of Kalguur, all the way to having 3 separate trees designed to unlock everything you need in league start in solo self-found. Since Necropolis we have 3 loadouts for the atlas passive tree. You start out with a single atlas. Once you have 50 atlas passive points, you unlock the second tree, and once you have 100 atlas points, you unlock the third tree. It doesn't matter how you get those points, whether it is from bosses, invitations, or by completing map bonuses. This means that the structure of this video is that we are starting off with a single tree up to 50 points. Then we're adding another tree, so we have 2 trees with up to 100 points. And then we're adding the third tree also at 100 points to simulate your progression through the atlas. And all of these trees are in the description as well, of course. My first atlas passive tree focuses on player power, getting maps and getting Kirac missions. I don't feel the need to dive directly into a specific league mechanic with one exception. I just want the strongest character I can have at league start and get as many maps and missions as I can. League mechanics at the start can also be very difficult, which is another reason to not immediately dive into Expedition, for example. The first 4 points of the tree go into Jun, or Betrayal. It is simply too good. You get Jun 40% of the time in your maps, which is amazing. All the field items are incredibly useful for gearing and for unveiling mods. Then I rush Kirac missions. Skip the strong boxes and skip the shrines for now, just take most of the Kirac ring, including the commissioned officer. You now have a 14% chance to grant an additional Kirac mission when completing a map, which is valuable because you can first run those and get unique maps, for example, but also it resets the Kirac inventory, meaning you can buy more maps from him you haven't completed yet. Kirac in general greatly speeds up atlas points. Up next are the map nodes you have access to, meaning map sustain should be a bit easier. Then I focus on making my time smoother in maps, so I'm taking the shrine nodes. Those buffs really help, and in the end I'm taking strong boxes. I really like strong boxes, they spawn tons of monsters, decent gear, more maps, gems, scarabs. It's just a good system in my opinion, and not too challenging at league start. And that's all there is to it. Once you reach 50 atlas points, you unlock the second tree, and it has 50 points for free, or basically from the get-go. We're going to spend those now on actual league mechanics, for now focusing on more Betrayal and Expedition. The nodes towards Hunt for Answers provide a decent chance to spawn Expedition. Bribery and effective leadership increase the syndicate members spawning and they drop more field items. You should definitely take Ancient Decay, because Expedition is hard at league start. You take the whole Expedition ring, making explosives more potent and making the rewards better. The Betrayal test of loyalty doubles the promotion of syndicate members, which means you get to raid their safe houses much faster, or kill Katarina if that's what you want to do. I typically just do both. And then 2 very important Expedition nodes, rather important, increasing Rogue to appear more often, and a noble quest causing Danik to appear more often. You want these 2 guys because you are interested in rock crafting and because you can turn Danik's currency into Rock's currency for even more crafting. I will do a video on rock crafting soon with some easy beginner tips. It's not as daunting as it seems. This concludes the second tree. I think all that's left to say is that you can now pick and choose between those 2 trees. Tree 1 gives you much more player buffs and tree 2 gives you much more gear. You can simply vary between the 2 depending perhaps on how hard the league mechanics are or how strong your build is. Alright, back to tree number 1. We are investing further to 100 points. This tree will remain a generic, powerful, all-purpose tree designed for running a bunch of maps without doing anything specific. I think especially in solo self-found that is completely fine. There's no need to make currency, you just want a solid atlas tree that is generally good, and that is exactly what this thing is. We expand the tree by taking the item quantity nodes, which is even better now with all item quantity removed from gear. Then we take amplified artifacts for more scarabs, chiseled perfection, which makes the maps harder but also much more rewarding. This is optional, but I think I'm going for it. Invasive adversaries, adding more difficult monsters with more rewards to the maps. All that glitters for the item quantity shrines, and remarkable relics, which somehow wasn't nerfed and should be part of at least one of your atlas trees. Down in the bottom center we also take skittering swarms for even more scarabs and mounting modifiers for even more map modifier effect. At 100 points, this Atlas tree will make maps fairly difficult, but also quite rewarding, and overall I think it shouldn't hamper your progression. If you're already struggling though, skip all the map modifier nodes on the Atlas tree and pick something else. Then we hop back to the second tree, also at 100 points. All we really do here is just add a bunch of additional nodes that are all very close and nicely positioned to where we are, meaning specifically more breach nodes, some more expedition, and also filling up most betrayal nodes. A notable mention is heavy breach, which I consider to be a mandatory node when running breach. I would rush that one because it makes breaches a lot more manageable. And if you rush buried knowledge, you get 100% expedition in the map plus more logbooks, which at league start can yield many rewards, especially a lot of smaller currencies that in Souls of Self-Found are valuable at league start. The main reason for running breach is that we need the splinters for the Maven invitations, and you might as well start collecting them because it will take a while in Souls of Self-Found. Besides that, the breach spawns so many rare monsters that I think it will synergize rather well with Sentinel and with some of the resources you need to gather for the town perhaps, as those are breach monsters, so they may very well inherit all the Atlas modifiers, and with something like Wildwood Wisps. Because we reached 100 Atlas points, we unlocked the third tree, and this tree is dedicated to boss rushing. This is important in Souls of Self-Found because to unlock all the Atlas passive points and a lot of the favored map slots, plus all of the 4 void zones, you need to kill a bunch of bosses. And quite a few of those bosses require fragments, and those fragments come again from other bosses. In short, to get all of this done, you need to kill shitloads of bosses. By having the Maven witness those bosses and by putting more map bosses in the maps, you can gather those fragments quickly, and you may get lucky and drop a few awakened support gems along the way, who knows. Most of the nodes by now are familiar that you see on the Atlas tree, but let's go from top left to top right, explaining some of the ones we haven't talked about. Cheering Champions works well because we have multiple map bosses from time to time, so that's a decent number of additional scarabs. Conquered Conquerors have you drop many more Conqueror maps, which contain the Elder Slayer bosses like Veritania, which you need to kill for the fragments to fight Cirrus. Remnants of the Past makes you get more Elder and Shaper Guardian maps, again containing bosses with fragments that let you fight the Elder and the Shaper and ultimately Uber Elder. Be aware that you can now change Elder and Shaper fragments into their counterpart by Hordicrafting, so you need only to kill 2 Elders and 2 Shapers. Destructive Play got nerfed, which is pretty bad honestly, but it is still the best way to fight a bunch of extra bosses and get more maps and other loot. Not a big fan of that nerf, and I'm not sure why they did it. I missed it in the patch notes as well, but the Maven only spawns these extra bosses 20% of the time instead of 100% of the time. And finally, Vivid Memories, to find additional synthesized maps, which you also require for favorite map slots and an invitation for an additional Atlas point. As this is a league start guide, and as I've already got plenty of Atlas strategy videos which I will update for 3.25, I decided to not take it further now than the 100 points. There's just no real need. You're going to take a while completing all of this anyway, and as soon as you've got the Atlas completed, you got all the void stones and you have the favorite maps and you have all the currency to respec, you can do basically anything you want. You will notice that there are some league mechanics I am not touching even once in these Atlas trees. Bestiary and Incursion are fun, but in a league start scenario don't offer all that much. I would still run a completed temple, however, if only to get some more maps. Blight is something I tend to do later in the league when I need the oils for anoints. You typically don't get much value out of it in the early league otherwise. Legion, same thing. It is amazing for currency, but we are in Souls of Self-Found. Also, quite some builds have issues killing all of those stasis monsters, so I'm skipping it entirely. It used to be useful for the map device 5th slot, but that is not tied anymore to Legion, so there's no real reason to run it in Souls of Self-Found. Heist is optional, I typically do that much later. Ritual is pretty good honestly, but it is on the bad side of the Atlas tree. As soon as I would be done with Breach and Expedition, I would most likely swap that tree to a Ritual tree, because Ritual is just a lot of fun I think, especially now with the rework. And Delirium, I mean, you will occasionally get a mirror, but unless you rely on cluster jewels early on for your build, which is a bad idea in general in Souls of Self-Found, I see no real reason to invest in Delirium. And Ultimatum, I mean, it kinda sucks. I would only run it with some scarabs. Essences I do find useful of course, but way too difficult to kill in the early league, and so it is off the table. You can run them at lower level maps and lower tier maps, but yeah, I just think it's a bit of a hassle. I'm typically not bothering with essences until much later in the league. And that concludes the video. That's really it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe and like for more PoE SSF content. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.